Welcome to Coffee Break. Thoughtful conversations for a busy world. Let's begin. Welcome to this deep dive. And I have to say, our mission today is highly specific. It's totally singular. And frankly, it's a little intimidating.
Yeah, intimidating is probably the right word for it.
Right. Because usually we bring in these massive stacks of research papers or, thick historical biographies, complex data sets. We sift through thousands of words to find the signal and the noise.
We do. We love a good, dense data set.
Exactly. But today, our source material is just 11 words. We are unpacking a single, incredibly potent excerpt from a text called The Myth of Final Arrival.
Just 11 words. It's wild.
It is, and the sentence reads simply, "Nobody is coming to tell you that you finally arrived."
Wow. Yeah, it just kind of stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It completely stops you. And we're going to take this one line and use it to completely dissect the societal waiting game we all inevitably play. Especially, and we're talking directly to you, the listener here, especially during those long stretches of your 20s and 30s.
Right, because that's when the waiting game is at its absolute peak.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to dismantle this neurological illusion of a sudden, magical certainty that we somehow believe is owed to us, and we'll explore the cognitive mechanics of what it actually takes to claim your own inner authority.
I love that. Which means, I think, we need to start by visualizing the psychological architecture most of us are currently inhabiting, like right now.
Okay, let's unpack this. Build the picture for us.
So consider a waiting room. The chairs are, slightly uncomfortable. The lighting has that sterile, artificial hum to it.
Ugh, I can hear the hum right now. Fluorescent lights.
Exactly. And there's this heavy, frosted glass door at the very end of the hallway. You're just sitting there flipping through some metaphorical, outdated magazine, constantly looking up at the clock.
Just waiting.
Just waiting. And you are listening with every fiber of your being for your name to be called out by some unseen authority figure behind that glass.
That is such a visceral image. The implication there is that you are waiting for someone with a clipboard, right? Someone with this unquestionable institutional power.
Right, the person in charge.
Yeah. To open that door, look right at you and say, "Congratulations, we've reviewed your files. You are now a fully certified, entirely certain, completely put together adult. You may enter the real world."
It's an absurd image when you articulate it out loud like that.
It really is. But if we look at the behavioral economics and the psychological profiling of modern adults, particularly millennials and Gen Z, we structure our entire lives around the anticipation of that door opening.
We do. We treat adulthood as this static destination rather than a biological and psychological continuum.
So true. We think it's a place we arrive at, not a process we're in.
And that's where the word myth, in our source title, The Myth of Final Arrival, provides the perfect anthropological framework for why we do this.
Tell me more about that word myth, because we usually think of it as just a lie, right?
Exactly. When we hear myth colloquially, we tend to equate it with a simple lie, like a fairy tale or an urban legend. But in anthropological terms, drawing from frameworks established by thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss or Joseph Campbell, a myth is a foundational narrative.
Okay, so it's not a lie, it's a structure.
Yes. It is an organizing principle. A society actually relies on myths to make sense of the world, to enforce social order, and to give its populace a legible script to follow.
A script to follow. That makes so much sense.
Right. So the myth of final arrival is the script we are handed to ensure societal compliance and productivity. It's this overarching narrative that life is a series of clearly defined hurdles.
Like getting the degree, landing the career, buying the property.
Exactly. Starting the family. And the myth says that once you clear that final hurdle, you cross a metaphysical finish line into a state of permanent psychological homeostasis.
You reach the end and you're finally calm forever.
That's the promise.
And the reward for crossing that finish line is supposed to be this magical, unshakable state of having it all figured out. Which, my hypothesis here is that this specific myth is largely a post-industrial concept.
Oh, absolutely. How so?
Well, if we look back a few centuries, the transition from childhood to adulthood was purely functional, right? Yeah. And economic. You were a child and then, boom, you were put to work in the field or the factory.
There was no transition period. You just started working.
Exactly. There wasn't this prolonged, agonizing 2-decade period of what developmental psychologist Jeffrey Jensen Arnett calls emerging adulthood.
Right. Emerging adulthood. That's a crucial concept here.
It is. Because now we have this massive gap where we obsess over our identity and wait for an internal feeling of certainty to match our external biological age. We've basically created this modern chasm between biological maturity and societal arrival.
The data on emerging adulthood strongly supports that hypothesis, too. Arnett's research highlights that industrialized societies have essentially delayed the markers of adulthood.
Because the economy demands it, right?
Exactly. Because the economy requires longer periods of specialized education, and the social structures have just become incredibly complex. So we spend our 20s and 30s in this state of suspended animation.
It really feels like suspended animation.
Yeah. We check off the boxes on the societal rubric, assuming that the internal feeling of certainty will trail just behind the external achievements.
Like, you get the job title, you secure the lease, you figure out how to navigate an index fund.
Which is hard enough on its own.
Right. But internally, the cognitive dissonance is just deafening. You look at your W-2 and your tax returns and you think, okay, I'm doing the things, but your internal monologue is still waiting for the adult to walk into the room and take over.
Yes. You're waiting for the real adult to show up.
The psychological toll of that cognitive dissonance has to be massive. I mean, if we map this onto neurobiology, spending 20 years anticipating a sudden tectonic shift in your identity that never comes, that seems like a recipe for chronic allostatic load.
It absolutely is, because we treat our current state of confusion as a temporary glitch.
Like an error in the system.
Right, an error that will be patched in the next software update. We internalize the uncertainty as a flaw in our personal character, rather than recognizing it as the baseline reality of the human condition.
We think we're broken because we don't feel certain.
Exactly. And the neurological cost is indeed profound. What we are really talking about here is a sustained prediction error.
Okay, prediction error. Break that down for us.
So the brain's dopamine system is constantly generating predictions about future rewards. When we are told by society our foundational myth that achieving X will result in the internal reward of Y.
With Y being absolute certainty and arrival.
Right. The brain expects that payout. It gears up for it. But when you get the promotion or reach the age milestone and that internal feeling of arrival doesn't materialize, the brain registers a negative prediction error.
It says, hey, where's my dopamine? Where's my certainty?
Yes. And over a decade or two, this continuous failure to achieve the promised internal state leads to systemic anxiety. It leads to what we often diagnose as imposter syndrome.
Oh, wow. So imposter syndrome is basically just a negative prediction error on repeat.
In many ways, yes. We assume we are the only ones who didn't receive the payout. We think everyone else got the certainty software update, and we were left out.
That makes so much sense. But if the failure is systemic rather than individual, we have to reevaluate the architecture of that waiting room we visualized earlier.
We do.
Because we look around at the other people in the waiting chairs and we think they look entirely put together. You know, they have the briefcases, the confident postures, the polished LinkedIn profiles.
They look like they know exactly what they're doing.
Right. We assume they belong there and are just waiting to their final stamp of approval, or maybe they've already been called back by the doctor. But the deception of the myth is that there is no doctor behind that door.
No doctor at all.
In fact, if we push the analogy to its logical conclusion, there isn't even a door. The waiting room is the entirety of the experience. It is the main event.
I love that. There is no door. And that realization that there is no door, it forces a radical reevaluation of how we spend our cognitive energy.
How so?
Well, if we aren't waiting for an event to happen to us, we have to look at why we are so desperately clinging to the expectation of that event. Why does the human organism crave the feeling that everything is figured out?
Right. If we pivot from the anthropological myth to the neurological reality, we have to confront the grand illusion of certainty itself. Because the brain doesn't just prefer certainty, it relies on it for survival.
It's a biological imperative.
Exactly. If we look at predictive processing frameworks like Carl Friston's free energy principle, the brain is essentially an inference engine designed to minimize surprise.
Because surprise is dangerous.
Surprise, in an evolutionary context, usually meant death. If you were surprised by a predator, you didn't pass on your genes. So the brain expends massive amounts of metabolic energy trying to anticipate what is going to happen next.
It's constantly modeling the future.
Constantly. And ambiguity and uncertainty are interpreted by the primal hardware, the amygdala, as literal physical threats. It triggers cortisol release and autonomic nervous system arousal.
Which is why it feels so uncomfortable to not know what's next. That mechanism explains why the myth of final arrival is so incredibly seductive.
It's a promise of safety.
Exactly. It promises a permanent end to vulnerability. It promises this low-energy state where the brain won't have to work so hard to predict the future, because the future will be secure, locked in, and guaranteed.
We just want to relax.
We do. We chase certainty, not just because of societal pressure, but because our biological hardware is constantly trying to minimize the metabolic cost of navigating the unknown.
We want to believe that adulthood is a sanctuary where the free energy principle has been permanently resolved.
Yes, a sanctuary of certainty.
And this leads us to the ultimate spoiler alert of this entire deep dive, and frankly, of professional and adult life in general.
Here it comes.
It is the single most terrifying and liberating realization a person can have in their late 20s or 30s. Everyone is guessing.
Everyone is guessing.
The CEO, the senior partner, the politicians, the people who wrote the foundational myth, they are all operating with incomplete information.
They really are. And there's a sociological term for this phenomenon. It's called the obfuscation of ambiguity through institutional structure.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Break that down.
Basically, when we are on the outside of an institution where we're looking up the hierarchy, we only see the polished outputs.
The finished product.
Right. We see the finalized quarterly report, the confident press release, the decisive medical diagnosis.
Yeah.
We do not see the messy, agonizing, highly subjective sausage-making process that led to those outputs.
It's totally hidden from us.
Exactly. The architecture of professionalism is designed to project a Wizard of Oz effect. It hides the frantic lever-pulling happening behind the curtain.
Oh man, the Wizard of Oz effect is such a perfect way to describe it. I can actually pinpoint the exact moment this shattered for me.
Really? What happened?
I was sitting in a strategic planning meeting with people I consider to be the ultimate real adults, people decades older than me, individuals with immense structural power. And a completely unprecedented problem arose.
A true curveball.
The total curveball. And I sat back, fully expecting one of them to reach into their proprietary toolkit of adulthood and produce the objective, mathematically perfect right answer.
Because they're the adults. They have the manual.
Right. I was waiting for them to open the manual. Instead, the most senior person in the room looked at the ceiling, sighed, and said, "Well, the historical data is useless here. What if we just try this intervention and see if it completely tanks?"
Oh, wow. See if it completely tanks.
Yes. It was an epistemological earthquake for me. They didn't have a secret manual. They were applying heuristics, taking a swing, and hoping for the best.
That is incredible. And, the dual emotional response to that realization is a crucial developmental milestone.
A dual response.
Yeah. The initial wave is usually profound relief. When you realize that the authorities you assumed had reached that final arrival are essentially engaging in high-level improvisation, the negative prediction error we discussed earlier dissolves.
Because you realize you aren't the only one making it up.
Exactly. You realize you aren't broken for feeling uncertain, you aren't uniquely deficient, you're just operating with the same biological hardware and incomplete environmental data as everyone else.
The relief is amazing. And here's the catch, the relief has a very short half-life.
It does. It fades quickly.
It is almost instantly replaced by a sharp spike of existential dread. Because if the adults are just guessing, if the people steering the microeconomic ship or the political ship don't have a magical, infallible map.
Who is actually in charge?
Yes, who is driving this thing? It entirely shatters the hierarchy of those who know versus those who don't.
And that's terrifying.
It really is. The safety net woven from the assumed certainty of elders and institutional authorities vanishes, leaving you in a state of freefall.
And the psychological terror of that freefall is precisely why people cling to the myth for so long. It is easier to believe you are feeling at a solvable game than to accept that the game itself has no fixed rules.
So true. But wait, we need to make a very rigorous distinction here before we induce a panic attack in the listener.
Yes, let's clarify this.
When we state that everyone is guessing, we are absolutely not equating it with blind, uneducated flailing. We have to separate the concept of absolute certainty from the concept of competence.
Right. That distinction is paramount.
Because if I'm a passenger on an airplane flying through a massive, unprecedented storm system, I desperately want to believe the pilot knows exactly what they are doing.
Obviously.
If I find out the pilot is just guessing, my amygdala is going to hijack my nervous system and I'm going to prepare for impact. How do we reconcile the reality that everyone is guessing with the need to trust experts like surgeons, engineers, or pilots? We aren't saying a neurosurgeon and a first-year medical student are guessing at the exact same level.
No, not at all. And we can clarify this using the concept of Bayesian updating.
Bayesian updating. Okay, let's get into the mechanics of that.
So, your pilot and your neurosurgeon possess immense, highly refined competence. They have thousands of hours of training, vast data sets of historical outcomes, and finely tuned motor skills.
They have a lot of data.
Exactly. However, they do not possess absolute certainty about what the weather system will do in the next millisecond or how a specific patient's capillary will react to a scalpel. They're not omniscient.
So you can't see the future perfectly.
Right. What they're doing is engaging in an incredibly rapid, highly educated process of Bayesian inference. They take in new, ambiguous information, update their probability models in real time, and execute the most statistically sound maneuver available.
Oh, I see. So they're replacing the impossible goal of static certainty with the highly functional reality of adaptable competence.
Adaptable competence, that is exactly it.
The pilot isn't immune to the turbulence, and they can't predict every updraft. The pilot just has a much wider repertoire of responses for riding the turbulence without letting the plane tear itself apart.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And the illusion we are chasing in our 20s and 30s isn't competence. I mean, we can absolutely gain more competence in our careers and emotional regulation.
You can get better at flying the plane.
Yes. But the illusion is the belief that one day the turbulence will permanently stop. And we will no longer have to update our models.
We think the weather will just be clear skies forever.
Exactly. And by abandoning the pursuit of certainty and embracing the pursuit of adaptable competence, you transition from a fragile state to an anti-fragile state.
Anti-fragile.
Right. You stop waiting for the external environment to become perfectly predictable, which it never will.
Yep.
And you start building the internal cognitive flexibility required to navigate continuous ambiguity.
Which means if the storm never permanently ends, and if the other captains out there are essentially utilizing the same Bayesian updating to navigate the waves?
Or the turbulence, keeping with the plane analogy.
Right, navigating the turbulence. If that's the reality, we have to confront the core mechanism that keeps us trapped in the waiting room. We have to look at the exact phrasing of our source material. Nobody is coming to tell you.
That phrasing is so key.
It really is. If we realize that the people we thought were authorities are just highly competent guessers, we have to identify exactly who we have been waiting for to validate our arrival. We need to examine the architecture of the external validator.
And doing that requires a deep dive into developmental conditioning, and specifically the transition from pedagogical environments to adult reality.
From school to life.
Exactly. From roughly age 5 to age 22, the human brain in an industrialized society is subjected to a relentless, highly structured escalator of external validation.
It's totally structured.
You operate in an algorithmic environment. You are handed a syllabus. You are given a rubric. If you perform input X, you are guaranteed output Y.
Study for the test, get the A.
Right. Every year, you receive a literal report card from an established authority figure dictating exactly how well you are performing your role.
The brain wires itself entirely around algorithmic success. We are trained to solve well-defined problems where the parameters are clear, the rules are fixed, and the teacher possesses the answer key.
The answer key is everything in that environment.
But when you are deposited into the adult workforce or into the complexities of a long-term relationship, the environment shifts from algorithmic to heuristic.
Yes. There is no syllabus anymore.
There is no syllabus. There is no answer key. Yet the brain's neural pathways, forged over 2 decades of schooling, continue to frantically search the environment for the rubric.
We are desperate for a grade. Because the external structure vanishes, but the psychological need for it remains, we engage in a fascinating piece of cognitive projection.
We project the rubric onto the world.
Basically, yes. We internalize the absent authority. We construct what psychologists and sociologists often refer to as the phantom judge.
The phantom judge? That sounds ominous.
It is. The philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of panopticism is incredibly useful here.
Oh, Foucault's panopticon. Remind us how that works.
So in a panopticon, which is a theoretical prison, design inmates can be watched at any time by a central guard tower. But here's the catch. They cannot see into the tower.
So they never know if they're actually being watched at any given moment.
Exactly. And because they might be watched at any time, the inmates eventually internalize the gaze of the guard. They police themselves, assuming they are always being evaluated, even if the tower is completely empty.
That is a staggering analogy for modern adulthood. In our 20s and 30s, we are essentially performing for an empty guard tower.
We really are.
The phantom judge is an amalgamation of, like, our parents' lingering expectations, the socioeconomic markers of our peer group, and the curated algorithmic gaze of social media.
Social media is the ultimate panopticon.
It absolutely is. We walk around believing that this invisible panoptic committee is holding a clipboard, tracking our career milestones, evaluating our relationship status, and preparing to eventually hand us our certificate of final arrival.
We think someone is keeping score.
And because of that, we make massive life decisions, taking on six-figure debt for a prestigious degree, staying in unfulfilling jobs, buying homes we don't even want, purely to satisfy the gaze of an empty tower.
And the cognitive load of maintaining that internal surveillance is just exhausting.
It has to be draining.
It is. You are constantly running a background program, evaluating your own actions through the lens of an imagined, highly critical other.
Always judging yourself through someone else's eyes.
Right. And that's why the quote, "Nobody is coming to tell you that you finally arrived," is essentially a sledgehammer to the foundation of that panopticon.
It shatters it.
It does. It is the jarring revelation that the tower is empty, the clipboard is blank, and the judge is a phantom of your own creation.
I want to direct this specifically to the listener right now. I really want you to interrogate your own internal architecture. Who is the nobody in your life?
That's a great question.
When you hear the phrase, "nobody is coming to tell you," whose face did you subconsciously project onto that nobody?
It's rarely literally nobody. There's usually a face.
Right. Are you performing for a specific demanding boss, hoping they will one day pull you aside and declare your brilliance? Are you trapped in a dynamic where you are waiting for a parent to finally acknowledge that you are an independent, fully realized adult?
Or is it more insidious than that?
Exactly. Is your phantom judge just a vague, generalized societal gaze? Are you waiting for the universe itself to issue a push notification saying, "Achievement unlocked, you have arrived"?
Identifying the face of the phantom judge is the first step in dismantling their power. But we must acknowledge the psychological friction of this process.
Because it's not easy to let go of that judge.
No, it's not. The absence of the external validator is a profound double-edged sword. On one side, as we established, it is a kind of grief.
Grief? Why grief?
Because there is a deep primal comfort in the illusion of the panopticon. Believing that someone else is keeping score, that someone else is ultimately in charge, provides a sense of safety.
Oh, I see. If someone's in charge, I don't have to be.
Exactly. It means that if you just follow the rules perfectly, you will be insulated from failure and rewarded with validation. Recognizing that the tower is empty induces a state of radical existential freedom.
Radical freedom. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre talked about the anguish of radical freedom.
It did. Anguish is the perfect word.
When you realize that there is no external moral or societal authority to dictate your path, you are condemned to be free. You are entirely responsible for the meaning and the metrics of your own life.
Condemned to be free.
It feels like being suddenly cut loose from a tether in deep space. It's lonely, and the sheer weight of total responsibility can be paralyzing.
It is the ultimate existential burden. But we have to ask, what is the other side of that sword?
Right. If grief is one side, what's the other?
If the grief of losing the fantasy is the first side, the second side is the birth of authentic autonomy. If nobody is coming to evaluate your arrival, it means the phantom judge has absolutely zero jurisdictional power over your self-worth.
Zero power.
None. You are no longer bound by an invisible, inherited curriculum. The death of the external validator is the exact moment the locus of control shifts from the environment to the individual.
The locus of control shifts inward, and if the locus of control shifts inward, it fundamentally changes the nature of the conversation.
Completely.
If we are no longer waiting for permission, we have to look at the second half of our source quote. Nobody is coming to tell you that you finally arrived. If we are the ones who have to claim the you in the equation, what does arrival actually look like?
That's the million-dollar question.
If it's not a magical permanent destination of certainty, and it's not a certificate handed down from an empty guard tower, how do we functionally redefine arrival for ourselves?
Well, we have to move away from chronological and spatial metaphors. Arrival cannot be a place you get to, and it cannot be a timeline you complete.
So it's not a destination?
No. We have to redefine it as a phenomenological state of presence.
A state of presence. What does that mean in practice?
Final arrival implies an ending, right? A cessation of growth and challenge. True arrival is the ongoing daily practice of orienting yourself to reality as it actually is, rather than how the myth promised it would be.
So it's an active process.
Highly active. It is the conscious acceptance of the heuristic, messy, continuously updating nature of your life and saying, I am here, I am the one navigating this.
I am the one navigating. To really ground this in a mechanism you, the listener, can apply, I think we need to look at the tools we use to navigate.
Let's do that.
When we are trapped in the myth of final arrival, operating under the gaze of the phantom judge, we are essentially trying to navigate our lives using a GPS system.
A GPS. Okay, I like this.
A GPS provides turn-by-turn algorithmic directions. It tells you exactly when to turn left, how long it will take, and alerts you when you have arrived at your destination.
Right. You have arrived. The literal phrase.
Exactly. It requires zero internal sense-making. You just blindly follow the external voice. But claiming your own authority is like realizing the GPS satellite network has been permanently taken offline. You are handed a topographic map and a compass instead.
Oh, the distinction between the GPS and the topographic map perfectly illustrates the shift from external validation to internal authority.
How so? Walk us through the map.
A topographic map does not tell you where to go. It simply provides the data of the terrain, the elevation, the rivers, the valleys. To use it, you must first locate yourself.
You have to know where you are before you can figure out where you're going.
Exactly. You have to orient the map to the environment, take a bearing, and make continuous subjective judgments about which path to take. You become an active participant in the sense-making process.
You are making the decisions.
Yes. The GPS assumes the environment is predictable and the path is fixed. The topographic map assumes the terrain is complex and requires constant active engagement.
And the transition from following the GPS to reading the map is exactly what it means to trust your own authority.
It really is.
If the most successful established adults in the world are ultimately reading the topography and taking highly educated guesses based on their experiences, like the Bayesian updating we talked about, then your educated guesses based on your interpretation of the terrain are equally valid.
They are.
You have to trust your ability to read the map.
And this is where we often encounter significant psychological resistance. The fear is that claiming this internal authority, declaring that you are the ultimate map reader of your own life, will lead to pathological arrogance.
Arrogance. Yeah, I can see that fear.
People worry that by dismissing the external validator, they will become narcissistic or unteachable. They ask, if I am the sole authority on my arrival, why should I ever listen to anyone else?
I think that is a vital pushback. It touches on the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where individuals with low ability overestimate their competence precisely because they lack the metacognitive skills to recognize their own errors.
Exactly. They don't know what they don't know.
So how do we ensure that claiming our inner authority doesn't just tip over into epistemic arrogance? How do we remain deeply curious, open learners who actively seek out mentors and diverse perspectives while simultaneously owning our adulthood and refusing to be infantilized by the waiting room?
The safeguard against arrogance is epistemic humility.
Epistemic humility.
Yes. Arrogance is not the presence of inner authority.
Right.
Arrogance is the false projection of absolute certainty.
There's that certainty again.
Right. The arrogant person operates under a mutated version of the myth. They say, I have arrived, I have perfectly decoded the map, my GPS is infallible, and I have nothing left to learn.
They think they are the finished product.
Exactly. That posture is essentially a defense mechanism designed to protect a fragile ego from the terror of uncertainty. It is rigid and brittle. True internal authority, conversely, is entirely rooted in the acceptance of uncertainty.
Because if you truly accept the uncertainty, you don't need to pretend you have all the answers. The mechanism of internal validation changes. You aren't validating your perfection. You are validating your capacity to process new information.
Validating your capacity. I love that phrasing.
Thanks. Internal authority doesn't mean you possess an omniscient understanding of the terrain. It means you trust your fundamental ability to navigate the questions the terrain presents.
And when you operate from that foundation of epistemic humility, external input changes its function entirely.
What does it change?
You can actively seek out mentors, you can read philosophy, you can consume deep dives like this one, not to find a savior who will act as a replacement GPS, but to gather high-quality topographical data.
You are just looking for better information for your map.
Exactly. You become a scientist of your own existence. You aggregate the data from the environment, You evaluate it through the rigorously defined lens of your own values, and then you make a localized Bayesian calculation.
You make the call.
You make the call. And crucially, if the call turns out to lead you into a swamp, your identity isn't shattered.
Because you didn't bet your whole self-worth on being right?
Precisely. Your internal authority remains intact. Because your authority was never predicated on being right every time. It was predicated on your ability to adapt, correct your course, and continue moving.
So to finally break free from the source text, to stop waiting for someone to tell you that you finally arrived, you have to completely dismantle the architecture of the waiting room.
Tear it down.
You have to stop looking at the frosted glass door, realize that the lock is actually on your side, and walk out into the hallway.
The lock was always on your side.
Always. You have to consciously decide that the continuous act of sense-making, of reading the map, making choices, taking responsibility for the outcomes, and adjusting your bearing as you go that process is the arrival.
And when you apply this framework specifically to the turbulence of your 20s and 30s, the paradigm shift is profound.
It changes everything.
These decades are so often characterized by a frantic, exhausting search for the right path, the right career, the right partner, the right city that will finally trigger the promised feeling of certainty.
The ultimate right answer.
Right. But if you discard the myth of the destination, the questions you ask yourself fundamentally change.
Instead of asking the algorithmic question, like, is this the specific career that will finally get me to the finish line of adulthood? You shift to the heuristic question. Is this a terrain I find meaningful enough to navigate today?
Exactly.
Instead of asking, will this relationship guarantee me a perfectly secure, conflict-free future, you ask, is this a person I want to invest the energy in reading the map alongside today?
It's all about the present tense.
You take the locus of power out of a mythical, guaranteed future and plant it firmly in the empirical reality of the present moment.
You transition from waiting for life to start to actively participating in the life that is already happening. The autonomy is entirely yours, but it requires the courage to tolerate the ambiguity.
Tolerating the ambiguity. Let's synthesize the vast psychological and sociological terrain we've covered today, because we have covered a lot.
We really have.
Our mission was to unpack an 11-word quote. Nobody is coming to tell you that you finally arrived. We started by examining the waiting room we build in our 20s and 30s, driven by the anthropological myth that adulthood is a static, algorithmic destination of pure certainty.
And we explored the neurobiology behind why we crave that certainty.
The prediction error.
Right. And we revealed the great liberating spoiler of the professional and adult world, that the institutions and authorities we assumed possessed absolute answers are actually just engaging in high-level Bayesian guessing.
They are all just guessing.
They have adaptable competence, but they do not possess certainty.
Then we confronted the psychological weight of the panopticon. We stared down the phantom judge and recognized that the guard tower we have been performing for is entirely empty.
There's no one up there.
No one. The realization that there is no external validator brings existential grief, but it is the necessary prerequisite for radical, authentic freedom.
And finally, we redefined what it means to arrive. We shifted from relying on an external GPS to learning how to read the topographic map of our own lives.
You are the one holding the map.
Yes. We established that claiming your inner authority isn't an act of arrogance, but an act of epistemic humility. It is trusting your resilience to navigate the questions, rather than demanding you possess all the answers.
For you, the listener, navigating the complex terrain of your own life, the utility of this framework is immediate. It doesn't require a grace period.
No, you can start right now.
It doesn't require an institutional stamp of approval, and you do not have to wait for your next biological milestone to put it into practice. By accepting the messy, inherently uncertain nature of human existence, you reclaim the metabolic energy you've been wasting on the prediction error of the myth.
You can dismantle the waiting room today.
Right now.
The external syllabus is gone. The responsibility and the freedom is entirely yours to shape.
Which leaves us with one final structural question. We've mapped the terrain. We've looked at the empty tower where the phantom judge used to reside. If you truly deeply internalize the reality that nobody is coming to tell you that you finally arrived.
If you really believe it.
What happens if you decide right here, right now, in the exact middle of your current ambiguity, that you are the sole authority of your own arrival? If you are the one holding the compass, how does that fundamentally change the very next decision you make today?
time with us on Coffee Break. If this conversation stayed with you, you can find more episodes here on the channel. Until next time, take care.